Welcome everyone to this themed parent support group. To new people who haven't met me before, my name is Jane Ring. I'm the parent support officer at Look UK, and I have a very amazing, because I would think that, daughter who's visually impaired and also deaf. And I have some colleagues here. Sydney May, who's been talking, if you've just come, she's the Sussex officer at Look. I have Andrea. Everybody, this is Andrea's last meeting supporting us as project assistant. So at the end, we might have to give her a round of applause, but Andrea's in the background. She'll be monitoring the chat and letting people in and generally being amazing. And she's also got Susan, who's her PA. We have some amazing mentors. I will say your name wrong again. Simon, I think it is. I'm so sorry. And Marilyn, who's just joined as well. So they're going to talk to Sid in a bit. But the first person is Karen Holyoke, who is a teacher from New College, head of Key Stage 5 and teaches, is it P? I never get it right. What is it, Karen?
PSHE.
Thank you.
Yeah, sometimes people sneak a C in there as well, but I just call it PSHE. And relationship and sex education is sort of part of it as well. So yeah.
Brilliant. Thank
Hello,
you.
everybody.
Hi. And if people don't know, we record these sessions. So for those who can't come, it'll be on our website at a later date. And I will be sending out some resources as well, and hopefully some top tips from everybody. The mentors always have some great tips. I know Andrea and Sid might as well, and I'm sure Karen has for us. So let's look at the time. Not bad, 7:38. Are you okay, Karen, to go into your bit? Thank you very much.
Yes. I'm really happy to take some questions afterwards as well. So I'll talk about what we do at school at New College. If you're not aware of New College, it is a residential school for children and young people with vision impairments. We've been going 150 something years and still going strong. Oh, my screen just changed. Sorry, that took me by surprise. I've been teaching PSHE just for a year. I'm in my second year of doing it. The previous incumbent was a lady called Kathy Wright, who some of you may have heard of, who was as absolute expert. She was just nothing she didn't know. But I can tell you a little bit about what we do and what I find the gaps in knowledge of the students who join us and where we fill those in. Now, I looked for some research on teaching children about relationship and sex education if they've got a vision impairment. And not surprisingly, there's hardly any research at all. The one I did find was had a small sample of participants, but the conclusions of this research, I think, were quite interesting, may not be of a surprise to you. They concluded that most of the education in inverted commas, that people acquired was actually outside the classroom. So it would have been with peers and learning about sex and relationships from first-hand experiences. They also concluded that when it was taught in schools, there was inaccessible materials. I find from my own anecdotal sort of evidence of students who come to New College that frequently they have missed whole chunks of PSHE because they have been taken out of those lessons for Braille or for independent living skills or for mobility. When they have been there, then again, the materials have been inaccessible. So at New College, all the materials are accessible, so we don't have any of those two-dimensional diagrams. We were talking about these at the beginning before all the parents arrived, and I don't know whether Sydney, more than happy for you to chip in here, because you had some comments about the two-dimensional diagrams that you encountered, didn't you?
The one I remember most that somebody made for me was, I'm going to try and describe this accurately, but this was the male reproductive system And it was essentially three vertical lines, which all joined at the top. And the penis was the middle line, and the two testicles were either side, but they were level with the end of the penis. So either side of it, which, yeah, is just not quite like they actually are, I believe. It's not a fair representation to 12-year-old me who had never
and this is a real issue that a lot of people who aren't used to adapting resources for people with vision impairments think that a two-dimensional representation is good enough, and we know that actually it's not, especially not for something like this. So I've got several models at school, and they're very anatomically accurate. So for the female genitalia, I've got one where the students can explore exactly where the urethra is, the vagina is, and the anus is. And one of them's got a clitoris as well. I've also got one that is actually a sex toy, if I'm perfectly honest, but it's more real than the teaching aid one, which is a bit the material's just a bit stiff, whereas the sex aid one is more sort of realistic. And I also have, rather than just a condom demonstrator, we have got condom demonstrators. I don't know whether anyone's ever seen them, but they don't look anything like a penis whatsoever. They're just a cylindrical, sort of cylindrical penis-sized plastic thing. So I've splashed out on a penis which is more tactile, and it's got testicles, and it's got it can ejaculate, and the resource for the ejaculation can actually show up under a UV light, which is quite which can demonstrate the spread of how far an ejaculation will go. So what our approach is very straightforward. So I thought I'd talk about the model straight away so that you could get some idea of how matter of fact I think we all need to be with young people about relationship and sex education. There are more barriers and more difficulties when you're teaching somebody with a vision impairment, because there is so much from incidental learning that is lost, that people with sight learn without really realizing. One of the things that worried me about the research I found was that how much of the people's experiences about sex and relationships they were learning not in a classroom, not under the guidance of an adult, but with their peers in the playground, through pornography, which we do talk about in school. There is a site where there's you can get audio describes pornography. So it's important that we talk about how that misrepresents real life as well. So having open conversations with children is really important, and using correct terms as well. So rather than some sort of family term for a penis or a vagina, using those words and using those vocabularies, I think is really important, and that's what we're encouraged to do as educators, as PSHE teachers. Something else we do is challenge stereotypes. There's a question here about asexuality. So we talk about how gender is a social construct, and we talk about different identities, and how people can identify as binary or male if they're assigned female at birth. So we talk all about that as well, which actually I find easier to talk about with students with vision impairments than I did when I worked in mainstream, to be perfectly honest. Please stop me if I'm rambling, won't you? I have got some notes, but they seem to be disorganized, but they're not as disorganized as they appear. Understanding about friendships. Something else we do is we talk about what a good friendship will look like, and red flags for toxic relationships. A lot of the work we do is scenario based. So we'll give scenarios and then we'll have discussions around those scenarios. this all links into the idea of good communication. A lot of the students I've taught over the years have often been traumatized by people touching them when they weren't expecting it or without warning. And it has led to some really quite tricky situations. So self-advocacy skills is the key to this, I think. And I encourage the students to make sure that if they are in a relationship with somebody and it looks like they may be going towards having a sexual relationship, that open communication is absolutely vital. That your partner is encouraged to say what they want to do, and they don't do anything until there is consent. So a student, or someone I teach, I would hope would never ever let a partner just or pounce on them in various and just touch them in areas that they haven't talked about before or discussed before, or warned that, right, you've said I can touch your breast, well, I want to touch your breast now. So I think that's really important. Okay. We talk a lot about socially acceptable behaviours. So obviously I teach teenagers. We have students who are 17, 18, 19 at New College. Sometimes I have to tell a couple to stop snogging in public because they're not cognizant or aware of their surroundings and who's around them. This can also lead to some tricky conversations I've had with students about masturbating in front of other people, because again, they're not aware of who's around, and it just feels nice, and it's just something that they're doing. So that could be quite a tricky one, but you just have to approach these things head on. I've talked about pornography. Yeah, there's a good, I don't know whether anyone's ever come across a film which likens consent to making a cup of tea. Has anyone ever seen that? All I've got in front of me is blank screen, so.
I haven't seen it.
Okay.
No, I haven't.
Okay.
Oh, Angela Large has, and so has Ellen Johnson. There you go.
Oh.
Some people have.
Okay. Well, if you just Google consent and a cup of tea, it'll come up. This on YouTube, and we show that to the students, the younger ones. By the time they get to year 11, 12, 13, they just think it's ridiculous because they see through it straight away. But for the younger students, in terms of consent, it's a really, really good film to watch with your child. Always do these things with your child, because they need that guidance. And also be assured that teaching or talking about sex and relationships does not lead to promiscuity. It doesn't mean that a young person is going to suddenly get really curious and want to go out and have sex. That's just not a thing. That's just not a thing at all. The more they learn, the more they understand, the safer they are, and the more protected they are. Okay, I think I've gone through a whistle-stop tour very quickly. Self-advocacy, high self-esteem underpins all of this, in my opinion. So at school, it's not just me teaching sex education and relationships. The areas of consent, of keeping safe, of getting out of a sticky situation is taught throughout the whole waking day with mobility team, with the independent living skills team, house parents. I do get the police, had the police come in as well, and they've talked about things like spiking when kids are out in pubs. I do this for the sixth formers when I know they're going to go off to university, and it worries me that they could be very vulnerable. My daughter's been spiked twice at university, so I'm sort of a bit hot on that, a bit aware of that. And they can be quite vulnerable. So that we've got these a younger person might be able to help me out here. I can't remember what they're called, but you put them in the top of a bottle and you can put your straw in it, and then your drink is safe from being spiked.
Oh, that's a good idea.
I
haven't actually seen these.
No,
I've heard of them.
I did have one lying around, but I haven't got.
They're called spikies.
Thank
there you
you.
go.
I might be able to find out the contact for them, because you can actually order on them online, because we've used them in work.
Okay.
I've got my work, we do give them out. So yeah,
Okay.
there's a
Yeah.
lot of needle spiking cases going around as well.
Yes, yeah, and I think it's so, and that's what my daughter's been done with her drink, and she's been spiked with a needle, and so and that was in the student union as well. So I'm really hot on that with the students, and you can't protect everyone from everything,
I think
but
you can get like lids for your glass as well if you've
yes,
got
you
glass
can.
rather than a bottle.
Yeah,
Almost like the McDonald's drinks lids where you've just got a glass and a hole for your straw.
yeah, that's right. That's right. Okay. Has anyone got any questions about what I've said so far? Because I was speaking very quickly.
Andrea, do you want me to go through them? I don't want to take away all your very important job on your last session.
Yes, please, because I didn't actually see a question. I just saw that the models have gone down really well. And Ellen Johnson said, which models are they? I think it was Ellen, sorry if I got it wrong, so that they can be recommended to local sensory services.
Okay, the anatomical of the women I'd recommend is she's called Wendy, and she was designed by a vicar's wife, and it's actually a plaster cast of this woman. You can even see the what do you call them, the skin. Oh, what do you call those little dots on your skin? Well, you can see those on the skin. Pores, thank you. You can see the skin pores on it, and that's the one with the clitoris, which I think is again really important. I can send Jane some information about where to get the models, and the penis was yeah, I can send Jane the shops, online shops where I got them, because I think services would really benefit from having them, especially the penis, because those condom demonstrators are just rubbish for really understanding about what penis is and how it works. We've also got at school testicles with lumps in, so students can recognize if there's an abnormality in testicles. I do talk about breast examination for the girls, and I was just talking to the people earlier, and I was saying that I've got tools that doctors use for smear tests, because it's all very, all these like medical things that are used are incredibly scary for someone with sight. So imagine what it's like when you haven't got that incidental learning. So, and it's important, I think, that young girls especially, can touch the instruments that's about to be used to do a smear test. But so I'll give Jane the details of where the models come from, so that you can recommend them to VI services.
Thank you. There is a couple more questions, Andrea.
Yeah, where can parents and teachers find resources?
Well, I'll send the details of the models, resources. The PSHE Association website is really, really good, and Jane's got a whole list of really good websites and resources on there. I've had a look through them all, they're relevant and really good. And in terms of resources, I mean, you just use what you're gonna have around. So you just use the condoms you've got. There's not so many special things. It's more about how you present them and how you show them, but you can't better those for the anatomy, those 3-dimensional resources. 2-dimensional ones are just not going to work.
And Sarah said about, can you help with where to get advice for VI kids with learning disabilities too? Because it's
Yes. I don't know. I'll have to think about that, because it's just something I do. It depends very much on the individual child and their level of understanding. Sometimes that drip feed is really important. So I've got a student who I'm constantly reminding about what is appropriate touch and what's not appropriate touch. So it's going to depend very much on that individual. But the hormones very often, depending on maybe some sort of genetic condition or not, but by and large, hormones are developing quicker than cognition, and that's something that needs to be borne in mind very much. I think I'm really sorry I can't answer that one directly, but I think it's going to very much depend on the individual.
And looking through, Sarah, the resources that were put together, because did a session with professionals, I think, at the launch of the new RSE curriculum a couple of years ago, which is the resource sheet I've got, and there is some resources and advice about supporting learners with people with learning disabilities and visual impairments. So hopefully that will be helpful as well.
Yeah, I mean, safety is the key. Safety, consent, self-advocacy, and absolute keys, I think.
Because Sarah also, she comments that thinking about vulnerability, the learning disability children, because they need to learn the same, and be supported.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to say any more, Sarah, Cubite anymore, because I sound like I'm clumsily asking for you. No. It's to do with consent.
Yeah, that cup of tea video is really good because I've just discovered how to see the chat, so I can see the questions now. That's very helpful. That cup of tea video is really useful for children with who've got cognitive needs. Right, I've just seen one here about discussing this with a teen who's already experienced significant trauma. I would say that a lot of the students I work with have experienced trauma. I'm a trauma-informed practitioner, so I can combine what I've learned from being a trauma-informed practitioner with teaching relationships and sex education. So I can use the very careful language and questions, and knowing the background, understanding the triggers that they might experience, sometimes teaching them one-to-one. That's the other thing, we've got that luxury of sometimes teaching students one-to-one away from a group if they've got different needs. And I would definitely do that depending on the trauma, but I definitely do that with someone with significant trauma, because it can be very hard. And always give a warning before the lesson about what's going to be in it, just so that they can leave if they want to. Oh, thank you. Spikies and drink covers for glasses. Thank you, Vicky.
And I would say that the people pleasing is a big thing, which is the other thing for Sarah, because how do you give them the knowledge to kind of not just go along with things if they're not happy? So would you say cup of tea? Is there anything else you could add to that?
I think when you're guiding young people, that's a useful time to have a conversation about appropriate touching and not appropriate touching, because I know I've had students who've been quite when I first started at New College, I was quite naive, and I can remember one student used to start grabbing my breast as I was guiding him, and I was thinking, oh, and then I started talking to other members of staff. They said it's deliberate, he's doing it deliberately. So that's a really good opportunity to have those conversations as well. And talking with very, very young children, as you're going through body parts, you tell them what their body parts are, and be quite frank. I mean, it's up to you as a parent how frank you want to be, but it's quite useful to be quite frank. And then there's also a good campaign by NSPCC called Pants, and talks very much about areas of the body that are yours and that are private and that no one else should be touching. That's an important message for very young children, I think, for any children.
When you, I'd be interested when you do your lessons, particularly kind of on what do you involve parents or?
Yes, well, our parents are peppered all around the country, But what I have done, I think we might have one of our parents here. I can see a name that's familiar. Last summer, I had a meeting with parents and I talked about the relationship and sex education policy. I had parents' input on it. So yeah, parents are involved in how and when various aspects of the curriculum are delivered. I'm always happy to involve parents, always.
And how, as parents, I guess it's hard for you to answer. So there are lots of parents here whose children don't go to the specialist school and don't know exactly how their young people are being taught, if they're being taught, if they're, and that's why I know people want access to models and things. So, how do we stay involved in some way and make sure that kind of the message we can reinforce and support the messages?
I think you need to contact the school that the children are at and talk to the teacher responsible for PSHE and engage with them. That's what I would do, without a doubt. Vicky, yes, I do talk about Ask Angela. There's a question here: is do you share the Ask Angela scheme? Which is a scheme for when someone doesn't feel safe, they can go up to the bar and say, is Angela here? And then that person behind the bar knows that person needs some help.
Brilliant. Thank you. Has anyone got any other questions or thoughts for Karen? Anything you need help with, you can carry on asking in chat before I introduce Sid and our two fantastic mentors who are going to chat together about their experiences. Wow. I'll take that as a no, but thank you, Karen. It's so useful and interesting to have you here. And like I said, we will send on information afterwards.
Yeah, well, I'm always happy to answer questions. It's a massive subject to do in 20 minutes, but and it is really quite shocking, some of the things I have to talk about. And sometimes I feel like I'm telling young people that Father Christmas doesn't exist because there's a lot of difficult content. But I'm more than happy to answer questions, or if anyone wants to contact me at the college, absolutely fine.
Brilliant.
Thank you for asking me to come along.
It's a pleasure. Are you happy to stay till the end?
Yes, I'm happy to stay to the end.
You're a star. Thank you.
Okay.
Right, over to wonderful Sydney.
Oh,
we have Marilyn.
Hello.
Hi, welcome. Glad you made it. Marilyn's gone from one look event supporting someone else to this one. So, and also Timer, I was just checking she's here still. Well, you two can start chatting, and I'll check on her in the background.
Well, I think the main reason why I'm here with Jane, so as a bit of a background, I have no sight myself, and have grown up in that way. And I think I just wanted to lead on really from what Karen was saying there, kind of about something that I'm remembering, that I've been remembering at the end of that, was kind of how my mum sort of took a lot of that sex education into her own hands. And I don't mean she sexually abused her family. I realise that could sound wrong. And I feel like she was very open, and I grew up with a brother as well, which I think was helpful because my mum tended to talk about this stuff with us both. So we had an awareness of, what our different physiology was, and the difference between boys and girls. And I think that was probably very useful growing up. More useful than the two-dimensional diagrams that I mentioned earlier. Not that I touched my brother's physiology, I hasten to add. But I think in a way, if you're, I don't know, I think, but what am I trying to say? By the time I got to that sex education in school, I think I already knew a lot of the stuff that they were telling us. And that was really from my mum being very open and talking about this stuff. And I think that put me, I did go through mainstream school, and I went to RNC specialist PI school, college at 16, which was an awakening in itself, which is also something I can talk about. But yeah, just kind of thinking back, I've been sort of how my awareness was. I think when I did go to college at 16, I was an odd combination of very innocent, having not really had any experiences, but also kind of clued up in a more general way of exactly what goes where and kind of what happens and what might happen. And one of the questions we had was kind of around appropriate touch and boundaries, because something I discovered at RNC particularly was how a lot of some vision impaired people don't have the best handle on appropriate touch. And I think I was quite shocked when I went to RNC and realized how, for lack of a better word, handsy some people could be. And not even, I think some of the boys were, and this is something I was quite surprised about, but even the girls, I don't know, people hugged each other and were much more, yeah, physically close than sighted peers that I had been friends with in the past. And yeah, I'm going to try not to paint RNC as the place that everybody goes and all this stuff happens.
But it is.
But it kind of is. And it kind
I mean,
of
I've never been there, so I should just be quiet. But
it kind of
stories.
was. Yeah, and I think a lot of
but
people.
It's natural, you know. It's gonna happen.
You're in a residential situation. You're away from family.
Yeah, you're gonna put a box of hormones together with another box of hormones. What's gonna happen? They're gonna go together and explode. And all we can do is just all right, that was unintended there, but all we can do is just make them safe.
And one of the things that I said, one of the first things that I said when Jane asked me to do this tonight was kind of, my feeling is to make sure that parents understand that the vision impaired people do it too. Like, I feel like there might be parents, I'm not saying any of you, but I feel like there may have been a tendency to not talk about it in that kind of, well, they're disabled and innocent and they might not do this stuff. And I feel like that's a mistake. And I think the key, okay, I'm a life coach and I'm going to sound a bit therapist-y here. The key is communication, isn't it? And talking about all this stuff. Yeah, I'm just going to have a flick back to the questions we've had in advance just to see if there's so there was a question here about we often teach our children to walk away from upsetting or intimidating situations, which can be harder to find a quick exit for people when you're blind and vision impaired. Definite real concern. And I think for me, I've been thinking about my kind of dating experience as an adult. And again, it's common sense stuff that maybe even somebody with sight would use for things like, you know, I've done online dating because it's generally the way to do these things now. And I might meet someone in a pub who I've met online, and I will always do that in a pub that I know, and I will sit myself where I know the way out.
Or choose a spot near the door, even if you don't know the place.
Yeah, exactly. Choose a spot near the door. I know where the door is, and that's
make
how
sure it's
I try
public,
and stay safe.
so that, you know, no confrontation can happen.
Exactly. And I've got a local pub. I've got a pub really near me where, okay, maybe I go to the pub too much, but they know me, and they know my name, which might be a bad reflection on me, but it does mean I know if I'm there, they're going to be really looking out for me. So yeah, I don't know.
That's really important, the community aspect.
Exactly. I've rambled on a little bit. Is there anything you want to talk about?
Well, I mean, my background is completely different to yours. It's really interesting to hear all these different perspectives. I was a single child till the age of 15, and I had a sister then. So even then, not that it was any use to me, but my mom didn't really talk about things. I learned more from my teaching assistants at school than my mom. I went to a mainstream school, a non-UK mainstream school, which is probably important to mention. But they had like an after school thing going on for the visually impaired children from that school. So we weren't all in the same year, but we all went to the same place after school.
Okay.
And we learned about a lot of this stuff there, but mostly, again, those two-dimensional diagrams, maybe a bit more detailed than the 3 lines that you were describing, but you know, the tactileness, I don't know how to say that.
Yeah.
Of, like, I don't know, the penis, for example.
Yeah.
I remember the picture was quite, you know, there were little hair follicles or whatever. There were, you know,
Is this a
contours
two-dimensional?
there, but it was pretty two-dimensional. Yeah. As an adult, like I can't remember names. Karen, I think it was talking about all the resources that they have at New College, and I thought, oh my gosh, I wish I could have these as an adult, because you know, there's only so much research you can do online if you don't know what you're looking at. So for example, I wanted to start using a menstrual cup, and I didn't feel safe to talk about it with my mum. I didn't feel comfortable. I didn't want to. And so I went online, I looked at all these instructions, and I thought, I don't understand this, but I'm going to try it anyway. And I tried, and it took me about 4 years of on and off trial and error, painful experimentation, quite literally, because I had not had sufficient education to enable me to be informed about this and follow the instructions.
Wow.
So, you know, I read, what is a cervix? I don't know what a cervix is. No one's ever told me what a cervix is. What?
Wow.
What are
Was
we
that not
talking
covered
about?
in
Like,
school?
which bit?
Right.
Well, also the thing is, the education wasn't in English, so the terms didn't really cross-translate very well. And yeah, so we only got the basics from the biology classes, and yeah, we didn't really have much of a sex ed thing going on at school, apart from, you know, the usual don't do it, it's bad, or use a condom. So yeah, I've really struggled, but also I'm happy to see that there are finally resources that, you know, are being made. You know, the whole consent thing is really important. That was never talked about when I was young or younger. So yeah,
I got the feeling at RNC that there were certain, I hate to generalize, but I felt that there were certain boys who hadn't kind of been talked to about consent and about how they need to be waiting for consent or asking for consent.
I think certain boys also just, even though they might have been told, they just
that's
don't care.
That is a possibility. But I think there is also this kind of with some parents just being unwilling to talk about that sort of stuff. And it's interesting.
I can completely understand the unwillingness, because it is awkward, and it is, you know, it is sensitive, and your child may not want to talk or may not engage, but it is really important to bring it up, and, you know, both boys and girls.
It is. And I think it is about finding your boundaries and what you're comfortable with. And we've talked a little bit about friendships. And I think, you know, I mentioned that sort of how physically close people were was something that quite surprised me when I went to a college full of vision impaired people. But it was something I grew comfortable with. And it was something, you know, I would have friends who I would be physically very close to, who were just friends, and there was a boundary, and there was nothing sexual about it. And I did kind of become part of that world. And I remember a friend staying with me, coming to my mum's in school holidays, a male friend, and he and I were just sitting up. I think we were sleeping in separate rooms, but we were sitting up in bed at some point, and he was just in his boxers. I mean, I can't see him anyway, so if I'm not touching him, it doesn't really matter if he's topless. And it was just the kind of thing that I think my mum walked in and kind of went, oh, okay. To me, there was absolutely nothing to it.
I can imagine that,
yeah. And it was just that, to be fair, I was sitting next to him, but I wasn't touching him. Like I'm not even sure if I was aware that he was in his boxes, but it was just, that was completely unsexual. And I think, there is a need for physical closeness. When you can't see, there is a need for it because you don't have that eye contact. I think, you know, when people talk about your love language, and I would say mine is definitely physical touch. Like it's a massive part of, you know, if you want to reassure somebody or let somebody know you're there, you know, there is a need for physical touch. So I think that kind of teaching of, as Karen said, appropriate touch and inappropriate touch is really important, because you may find a vision impaired child wants more of that physical connection with somebody. And
children do tend to be encouraged to touch, especially if they're not if they haven't got much vision left, or if they're totally blind, they are encouraged to sort of, you know, put your hands on it, feel, you know,
you have to touch things to find out what they are.
Told, and the contact I've had with other younger children than myself at the time, I was probably about, I don't know, 13, 14, and these kids were about 5, 6. They were very, very feely, very touchy. Oh, hi, new person, let's touch you, you know, shoulders, arms. And obviously they didn't mean anything by it, but they would touch my breasts, and I would be a bit like, this is not comfortable. I know they don't mean anything by it, but I still don't feel comfortable. And the teacher just usually didn't do anything, which didn't help.
Wow. No, that doesn't help.
So I was just standing there, like, trying to have my arm in the way.
Oh God.
And
I was quite staggered earlier when Karen was saying about that student who would touch her breasts while guiding, and other teachers kind of said he does that on purpose. What I was thinking, and I don't know, Karen, if you can elaborate on this, but what I was thinking was, have no other teachers said anything to him about that? Like, because nobody else said anything.
I don't know.
Did they just get one with it?
Yeah,
just let him go. I don't think they would now. I mean, this was a while ago, and I certainly wouldn't. I would challenge that now, definitely. But I was new to the school, and I was like, oh, is that normal? Is that what happens? That's the first time I was sort of guiding him, and so that's why I think when you're guiding someone, that's a really good opportunity.
Absolutely,
to have that conversation. And Maren, just going back to what we were saying about being touchy, and Sydney. Now, so your language of love is very much about touch, but I know I've taught a lot of students who, because of being touched without warning, are traumatized by being touched, and often in a medical context. This is
and actually now, even worse. Now that you say that, I do have a hatred of being touched when I'm not expecting it. And I have a real hatred of being touched on my face. I really don't like people touching my face.
So
in any context,
you would have that conversation, wouldn't you? And say, I don't like that. If you want to touch my face, can we talk about it first? And then and I think, to me, that is to do with childhood. That is to do with constant medical stuff, people having to look at my eyes. I had stuff with my eyes and my teeth, and I just had constant invasions of my face, and I feel like that has something to do with it. And also just patronizing, like when people stroke your cheek, and every now and again that still happens to me, and I want to bite their fingers off. It's just
me too.
That to me is one of the most patronizing things. Sorry, Andrea.
Item.
I have been tempted. To me, there's nothing more patronizing if someone goes, "Oh, it strokes your cheek." And I'm like, "Oh no, hatred." So touch is it's a really tricky one, and I just think talking about it. You know, I was getting on a bus a couple of years ago, and a guy behind me just thought he was helping me, and I genuinely didn't even know there was a guy behind me, and he suddenly grabbed me around the waist as I was getting on the bus, and I'm like, that's not okay. You know, that is something that you find as someone with a VI, is people think I must lead them, I must help them, and you do get touched
when
a lot.
Stepping on trains. I can't even count the number of trains I got on and off today, because I've been traveling all day.
Oh God.
And every train, I think one train, I actually got to step down from myself without someone's hand being there and under my elbow trying to almost lift me off. I don't need your help. And the thing as well with the whole touch thing, you know, because of the like Karen said, the whole traumatizing experience, like it has proper put me off from finding relationships or closeness with people, because I'm scared of being touched in like that kind of close contact thing, like meaningful contact, you know. Some assistance person touches me, all right, I can, you know, just deal with it and move on. But it's scary. I don't know how to handle it anymore. Especially after COVID.
Well,
that didn't help.
No,
but
that really didn't help.
so
Just to jump in here, there's a bit of a chat going on in the chat about male looking after male side of things. I didn't know if Karen wanted to expand.
Yeah, I've just sort of joined the chat. Sorry, Sydney, it's very rude of me.
That's okay.
It starts talking about self-care with periods, but also self-care for young men as well. So yes, I do talk about wet dreams because it's a physiological phenomenon. And the house parents at New College are really, really, really good at this. They're a million times better than I am at the sort of self-care for the students.
Because they have to be.
Exactly. And I've just sort of made a comment there that sometimes it's easier for a professional, it's easier for us than it is a parent. I've got 3 kids and I can have much franker conversations with my students than I did with my own children, for sure. And so it's very difficult.
See, I think I was just very lucky, and I've said this on previous support groups, and I'm sorry if people have been on them before, and I have always expressed my gratitude for my mum, because I think she's not perfect. She didn't do everything right, but she did a lot right. And thinking about the period side of things, and she definitely did talk about wet dreams as well. I mean, God, maybe there was nothing she didn't talk about, but she was very open about her periods, and definitely even with both of us. So my brother had an idea of what they were, so he wasn't, you know, some boys are like, ooh, periods. You know, I think she tried to combat that, and she was very open with periods. I think she showed me a tampon probably when I was quite young, and sort of just told me, and she was very open about, I remember her being very open about PMS. And when we were young kids, she'd be like, right, today is not the day to annoy me. And she'd just be very open about it, which I think was good. We definitely had a concept of what PMS was at quite a young age. She would just be like, right, I'm feeling tense today. And I just think openness. I'm just trying to take away the taboo. Why is it so taboo? I think it's kind of that acceptance of, it's like I said, kind of in a crude way that blind people do it too. It's that acceptance that it happens, and so we should talk about it. And I think, you know, we were talking about learning difficulties earlier, and I know that makes it more difficult, but I don't think that means you shouldn't talk about it. It may mean you have to approach it in a different way, but even just the explanation of the different anatomy, what a girl is and what a boy is, because if you can't see that, you need to be told.
I mean, well, even if you can,
well, you still need it explained.
I've spoken to I've spoken to people over the last couple of days about their general experience of sex ed, not visually impaired people, mind, but and I've been told that in lots of places, boys and girls have a separate class, and girls are told one thing and boys are told another thing. I don't know if that still happens, or maybe I'm just talking to old people, but and yeah, I think it's really, really important for both to know about both, because
I agree.
You know, ask a man to go to the shop and buy a pad, and they look at you like, what?
Yeah, I have one.
Send them to the moon.
I have one memory of being out with my dad and needing period supplies as a teenager, and he just did not know what to do. And he was just like, mum normally does this, and I'm like, yes, but I need this now. Like, I'm sorry, it's an inconvenient time. And it was just so awful. It was really awful. And my dad
always planning. Sorry.
Yeah. And my dad is of a much older generation. But yeah, sorry, go on.
The general advice is not to split girls and boys up, because boys need to understand about periods. And girls need to understand what's happening with boys as well. I mean, I try and teach it all. I mean, we go through the menopause as well.
Good.
So they understand the menopause, which is very close to my heart at the moment. So I'm particularly good at teaching that.
Yeah. From experience. Or not. But I think
Yeah, see, it's not really something that's spoken about. It's briefly mentioned. Well, as far as I know, anyway, it's kind of briefly mentioned. Oh, yeah, well, menopause exists, but let's move on now. You know, no one actually talks about
you'll deal with that later.
Years and what it actually does, and you know, the whole hormone side of things, and there's so much to it. I mean, I'm 25, so a bit off menopause, but you know, I'm still interested to find out what's in my future and what I've got to, well, look forward to. And yeah, it's not really spoken about. And yeah, the whole period thing. Yeah, I always avoided weekends with my dad when I knew that I was gonna have my period, and I was like, Mum, no, I can't go that weekend.
Yeah, and that's not, you can't always predict it.
Planning for emergencies, and I was always so anxious when I knew that I'm a couple of days away from my period, and oh my god, I'm going around my dad's house and there's no bin in the bathroom, and what do I do now, and how do I can't talk to him because we're not that close, and it was
and it shouldn't be
being
something.
a teenager is hard work.
Well, yeah, it's hard work in every respect, isn't it, being a teenager? You know, I also went through kind of sexuality. I'm not even going to say confusion, because I was pretty sure when I was a teenager. I was never confused. But that makes it hard
that's a whole different thing, you know,
that's
being
massive.
confused about sexuality and then not really having resources to to combat that type thing.
There's so much there's so much going on when you're sort of 14 plus. Is a crazy age. There's so much to it, and
if you don't get enough education about this stuff, then all the confusion just extends into adulthood, like I was saying about the menstrual cup thing. You know, 4 years. Someone can go online and learn to do this thing in 10 minutes, and it took me 4 years. Why is this fair? Why can't I just be like everyone else? And that's when I get really sort of frustrated and go, I wish I could see for 10 seconds so I could look at this video. And just things like that. So
was it not described anywhere, like in enough detail?
Not really, no.
See, that I find quite shocking in itself.
The cervix was always mentioned, and I was I couldn't figure out what the cervix was, and so that's where the trouble kind of started, because well, if you don't know what a cervix is, then you don't know what to do with it.
When I was 17, I went to the doctor because I didn't understand what the thing on the outside of my vagina was, and I thought I was wrong in some way.
Oh wow.
And I couldn't ask my mum, and I was too shy to ask my friends in case they laughed at me, and I didn't have enough sight at that point to look at pictures. So I went to the doctor, and then she laughed at me, actually. She's like, of course it's normal.
You say that. You can't say of course it's normal. How do you it's not an of course, is it, if you've never been told?
But when you're 15, you don't know.
And this is where I think close friendships and close. I'm glad you're enjoying the chat. So I just saw that message. I hope we're not just going off on weird tangents.
Vicky wrote a really good message. Could Jane or Sue read it? It was about non-binary discussing periods.
Non-split groups would be easier on non-binary children, as they are uncomfortable in gender split groups.
That's true.
Opening conversations and negotiating periods is very hard with children not identifying as their birth gender. Huge impact on mental well-being at these times. And then it said also other trans kids.
That is a very good point there.
I think if I counted that, I would be I'd know in advance and make arrangements for that, because you're absolutely right. Periods for people who aren't identifying for their birth gender is hugely traumatic. Absolutely right.
And the body dysmorphia, is that what it's called? Dysphoria? For people who don't identify as their gender with penises. Sorry, that sentence was totally unstructured, but
We
yeah,
got it.
that
Got the
must
right
be quite a
phrase
big thing
there.
as well.
Yeah, and I think now that gender has been identified as a separate thing from physical sex, I think it's, you know, we are in a good age now of openness and understanding where gender does not have to be binary. It does not have to be just one or the other, and we're now reaching a point of understanding where it's more complicated than that, which I think is really good.
I personally love it very much. It's
yeah,
great.
absolutely. And I'll be really honest. And when I was a kid, I had quite a bit of trouble with that when I was a very young kid, and I thought I didn't really feel like a girl, and I hated my tiny little dainty girly body, and I had quite a lot of dysphoria. And yet when I came out, my mum said she didn't see it coming. So she missed that one. But no, I mean, I am now quite comfortable in my female gender. But yeah, there certainly was a time
I
when
haven't
I
even
wasn't.
come out to my family yet. It's
Wow.
insane.
Okay. Yeah, I guess there's cultural stuff with that as well.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Simon said something interesting when we were chatting. I'm sorry she's come off the call, but she said that something that the conversation made to think about was that how actually attraction is not based on looks when you're blind or partially sighted.
That's so
And
true.
that's a huge thing.
That's so true. And actually that's really relevant in that, yeah, who we are attracted to, because like people have asked me before, kind of like, how does attraction work for you, not
What's
being
your
able to
type?
see?
I don't
know.
know.
And I think, you know,
people are my type.
Yeah, I like intelligent people personally.
I like people who smell nice.
Yes, I always say
and
that.
intelligent people.
Yeah. Smell is
like,
very,
these
very
weird
important.
criteria that no one can relate to.
But and people have asked me, and actually somebody I was chatting to online quite recently kind of asked me how online dating works for me, because generally, you know, the first thing you have when you're talking to people online is a picture. And my answer to that is, well, I don't look at the pictures, I read the bios. If you don't have a bio, that's it, you're gone. But yeah, and it's about personality first. And I do think, and something I realized when I went to RNC and I was very comfortably not heterosexual, that actually I think sexuality seems to be a little bit more fluid in the vision impaired community. I think probably for that reason, in that the physical, the attraction, the things that you're attracted by are different. And I don't know the statistics of, you know, whether fewer vision impaired people are purely one way or the other. I don't know if that's true. I might just be talking absolute rubbish. But it did seem to me to be a little bit more fluid within.
I think it's the process of self-discovery that's kind of part of that fluidity as well, because you know, well, from my own experience, I thought I was very, very straight, and I was like, oh yeah, boys, you know, even though I didn't have any chance with any boy at that point. No. But yeah, so I was very kind of set in that way, and I was kind of aiming for that. But then later down the line, and I can't really put my finger on why. My opinions just changed. And then I started sort of reading about, you know, what other alternatives are there, what's actually out there, and exploring, you know, what can I be. And but because it was never really spoken about, you know, you're either with a boy or you're with no one. My mom had one lesbian friend, and she was always identified as the lesbian friend. And I really hate that, thinking back, but obviously I was like 5, so couldn't do anything. But yeah, I think the point I was trying to make was that the fluidity may come from just discovering the world and discovering that actually there are more than
there's more than one option.
There's more out there than just the kind of the heteronormative way of thinking, and actually we are free to be who we are. And perhaps as visually impaired people, because we're guided by adults and so much, and the input of those adults is so important. When it comes time for us to make those decisions, it's kind of like, oh yeah, okay, I'll have to have a think about that. I don't know. I hope that makes some kind of sense.
Like I said, what you're saying about being so guided by adults, because you're absolutely right. When you don't have that external stimulus of the rest of the world, sometimes your world can be quite small with no vision, and so you really are reliant on what you're told about. And so you're limited to the things that you're told about. So if there's something that you're not told about that other people might see when they look around, you know, I guess if you're never told that two women can walk down the street holding hands or two men can walk down the street holding hands, if you're never told that and you don't see it, you won't necessarily know that that happens. I'm presuming, Karen, that this is covered in PSHE sexuality.
It absolutely is, Sydney.
Yeah. Good. Good. I would have been horror struck if it wasn't. But yeah,
it
this day and age.
Yeah, for the reasons you've just cited. Exactly.
Yeah. You need to be told that it's a thing, I suppose. And I know, you know, there's definitely the cultural thing, and there's, I guess, families of certain religions won't want to teach that that's a thing, but that's not an issue we're going to get into.
It's religion, it's location. You know, my family are not particularly religious. Well, not religious at all. However, because of the general culture of the country, sort of the LGBT movement is relatively not new. I'm sure it's been around, but it's more in the picture because it's kind of been put there by people being loud and proud, which is how it should be. But that links in with the whole sexual education thing and the whole, we don't talk about this. It's just kind of, you know it from looking at other people, and obviously you can't do that if you can't see. So yeah, it's this massive, big, complicated set of factors that all add up to more complicated circumstances. But there was a question I wanted to comment on. I think there was a question about asexuality and discussing sex with a child who might be really reluctant, and that actually got me thinking because of the way I felt about talking about that stuff with my mum. And you know, I would tolerate it because, you know, if I walked out of the room, my mum would just come and catch me and
make you
and not be very happy with me, basically. So it had to be done. But in an ideal world, those things, I mean, parents are important, but if as a parent you struggle to get your points across, then maybe find someone else, another safe adult who isn't part of your family. I think earlier as well it was mentioned about talking about, I think Karen said how you had conversations, more honest conversations with students than your own kids, and it's kind of linked to that. You know, there might not be that many adults involved in a visually impaired child's life as there are in a non-visually impaired child's life.
Well, in a way there might be more with QTVIs, teaching assistants.
Talking to them, asking them to have that conversation, and maybe sort of putting the point across of, right, this is what I want to say. Maybe either all three of you can discuss it or just the two of them, and then you know, obviously sort of say, I've had a chat with your parent, and you know, let's just have a conversation. Nothing needs to happen, it's not a problem, it's just I don't know, that's kind of what I came up with.
No, I think you're right, and there will be people that find it easier to talk to people outside their family.
Like the first proper conversation I had about periods was with one of my teaching assistants when I was about, I don't know, 9, 10. I kind of knew about it before, but she did a really good job of explaining it really simply, and didn't patronize me, didn't make me feel like a fool. She just was kind of like, well, look, you're getting to an age and you need to know this stuff, and I don't know if your mum has told you, so I'm going to tell you. And she didn't make a big deal. She didn't embarrass me. She was a bit like, I know it's not the best thing to talk about. And she was really,
wow, good on her.
Yeah, she was really, really open. She was a lot more open than my mum ever was.
And it goes along with what Karen said, is that sometimes hormones will develop faster than emotional maturity.
Yeah.
And you kind of you have to talk about it. You can't stop it happening by not talking about it.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that goes with hormones and sex education in general. Not talking about it doesn't mean it won't happen.
Well, that's about the whole RNC thing as well. Not talking about it means that it will happen regardless.
Yeah, and I wondered, and I always wondered sort of how much other people had warning of kind of what happens as much as I did. But even though when I got there, like I said, I did still feel pretty innocent. I mean, there were other people there who were sleeping with people within a month, which I definitely wasn't. Definitely took me a lot longer. But there's not much of a gay scene in Hereford. That's another thing. Is it actually? Is you when you were talking
everyone's
about,
very straight there.
Yeah, I met a female couple once when I was out in Hereford, and I was really excited because they were the only ones there. But they were a couple, so I wasn't gonna.
Shame.
But I was thinking about that when you were talking about being in a different country, and I thought to a lesser extent, I did grow up in the countryside in Kent, and I did feel like the only gay in the village, and I moved to Brighton when I was 18. So,
yeah, Brighton's a lot more gay friendly.
To a lesser extreme of being in another country, but even being in a different part, particularly a really rural part of this country, it's quite different. And the openness and or lack of.
That's interesting to hear.
Oh yeah, no, it's definitely still a thing. Brighton is special. Sorry, go on.
Just to let you know, I have heard from Simon, and it's her Wi-Fi. So she got kicked out. They couldn't let me know. So I think we might not be able to hear from her. I'm also aware, I wanted everyone to know that I did ask for some mentors of the male persuasion, but they were more embarrassed. And I chatted to a volunteer for a while, but he wasn't sure about coming on because it was being recorded. So we will try and find some add to our resources in terms of male perspectives. He did say that something that he found really useful was a youth forum, and I think it was an Old Look one, and just lots of vision impaired young people got together with some mentors, and they had a conversation around relationships and sex, and it was really, really helpful. So I'm sure in the future there might be things that we can do. And he said about relationships, it's you need to be approachable, and it is really hard to say hi when you can't see faces or expressions, so you have to kind of find things in common. So he was passing on advice around just getting to know people as well.
And that is hard. It is hard. I'm 30 and single, and it's really hard, and I do the online thing and I talk to people online, but that's a really hard way to meet people anyway, because it's so difficult to create a textual conversation that you're going to keep interested in.
I completely agree.
But then it's really hard to meet people out.
Is so inaccessible. Everyone's after photos and things like that. But then you have to obviously get someone to help you do your profile, and that's a whole other thing of who do you ask?
I think definitely having good friends is really important. I'm very lucky. I have a very good friend here in Brighton, and there's pretty much nothing we don't tell each other. I mean, she's just had a baby. I know all the details. She told me something I can't remember what she told me the other day, and I just replied, and I was like, we literally have no secrets. I can't remember what it was that she told me. do you know what? A friendship like that, and this is not a VI friend, this is a sighted friend, but a friendship
that's great.
like, yeah, and that is so valuable. Like, I know if there was pretty much, I mean, yeah, I don't know, if I had a disease that I wanted her to look at, I'm not sure I would go that far, but there's most, you know, if I thought, do you know what, if I needed to do like a pregnancy test or something and I didn't want to tell my mum, that's who I'd go to. And I think it's massive.
Oh, that's
to
a
have a
whole
friend like
other
that.
thing
Oh,
that
yeah,
I've just remembered about, because
that's true actually.
I had an experience with an ex-partner where I thought I was pregnant because my period stopped. It turned
Oh my
out that
God.
it was just a hormonal thing. And yeah, I was thinking, well, I need to do a pregnancy test, but who do I ask to
Because you
just
cannot
look
do
at
that.
it?
You cannot do that independently.
R&IB are trying to work on a tactile.
I was going to come to you, Karen. Because
Yep.
there's no. I
No,
sent,
unless, well, you can use video calling apps now. I think Be My Eyes has a
It's
clear
true.
blue thing, but that was only a thing until a few years
really
ago,
recent.
so not even that long. So yeah, it's so inaccessible still,
Yeah.
which is why we need parents to be the facilitators of this world and to kind of make it as open as possible, really.
Yeah.
I
So
got
the-
in such a mess over my pregnancy test.
I was going to come to you next, Andrea.
Yeah.
Andrea, as our resident pregnant person, what can you add to this?
So basically, I can basically back up what you both just said, really. I took a test and didn't believe the result. I had to get my auntie to read it. And my family are older, and they're like, "Oh, you can't trust these things."
How
So
did you read it in the first place?
I didn't. I had to get my auntie to.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
So I took another test, and it came back not worked, and my auntie told me that as well.
Oh.
So I did another test, and I used
God.
TapTapC, which is an app on your phone, and it came back negative.
Can you use TapTapC for that?
Yes.
Wow, I did not
But
know
mine came back negative. So then I did another test, and I used Be My Eyes, which is a video calling thing, and that one came back broken. So as you can imagine,
Bloody hell.
I was a little bit confused at this point.
Yeah.
I'd had one positive, one negative, and two non-conclusive.
Right.
And I rang my doctor and I begged them to do a pregnancy test, and they said, "Oh, can't you get someone to help you?" And I said, "No, I've
had everyone helping me."
This is when I was back in because I did my first tests when I was at home, where my auntie's sighted. I was back in Cardiff. My partner's visually impaired, and he was freaking out at this point as well. So I had nobody I could say, "Can you just make sure I'm doing this test properly?" So I begged the doctor, the nurse at the doctor's, and they had to ask their management of the surgery to find out if it was something they were allowed to do. Wow. And it turned out as a one-off, so goodness knows if I want to get pregnant again.
If we do it for you, everyone will be asking.
As a one-off, I could bring a urine sample in and they test it for me, and it turned out I was very pregnant. I was 9 weeks pregnant.
Wow.
So, yes.
So the issues you were having, was that down to the tests or was that down to the technology?
I don't know if it was the technology, the test, or my lack of vision.
Right.
Because when you wee on a pregnancy test, you can't wee on the plastic bit at the top.
Yeah. How do you wee on it right?
Yeah,
I mean, I've never done one, but that sounds like a nightmare.
Have a go and let me know how you get on.
I feel like I should just buy a pregnancy test just to see what it looks like, because I've never actually seen one.
Well, that is true.
I don't think that's a bad idea.
Yeah, I think a very good idea.
But they're so expensive. That's a lot of money to just buy and throw in a bin.
I've got some at school. I'm just going to put something in the chat, which is a link to a tactile pregnancy test.
Okay.
I don't know whether it's on the market.
That's really interesting.
I heard of someone who was on the team for testing out a prototype a few years ago, and they were doing a film about it and everything.
Did someone just ask me a question in chat? I think I just heard my name.
So Vicky just said, it's bad enough for a sighted folk. Must have cost you a fortune, Andrea. Yes, it must have
Yes,
done.
it did. It cost me about 30 quid.
Oh, God.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's awful.
See, I'd be annoyed with that.
I'm very happy though. I got the result I wanted.
Of
So
course.
yeah.
yeah.
Andrea, before you go off, do you think you can ask your lovely VI partner, Chris, whether he would do some reflections for us? Written or, yeah,
Put
it
him on
would
the
be
spot, go on.
so brilliant. I am going to carry on searching for some more male perspectives, but
He might not, but I
sorry.
might have nabbed his best friend for you.
Yay.
Ooh.
So yeah,
Good.
he was also a parent actually. He's got a 4-year-old boy. And yeah, so he's quite open as well. He's very Norfolk, so
Very Norfolk. I don't know what that means.
Yeah, because obviously we've got quite a few questions from parents of young men, and it would be good to be able to share a bit more knowledge.
And we can only go so far with those answers.
Absolutely.
Exactly. It is 8:53, so I was wondering, one, if any parents have any other questions. I want to thank you so much, Sid and Marilyn, for having such an interesting chat, and for Andrea, as usual, not enough of your voice, but for joining in, because yeah, you are an absolute star, and it is like Angela said in the chat, it's really, yeah, I just feel honoured that you're able to talk to us about your experiences. But is there any top tips you'd like to share, reflections? Karen, shall I go to you? And also, I was going to ask you, is there a way that we can share out your wonderful expertise for all these poor parents who are scrabbling to try and get some support through mainstream?
Just contact me, and I'll just contact the college. There's a general sort of contact thing on the website, and that'll easily get to me. I mean, I don't have any nuggets of information, because each child I teach is different, and each child has got different experiences and different expectations and different goals in life. But I think it comes back to what I was saying with Sydney about self-advocacy and high self-esteem, and working on all of those as well is the absolute key. I mean, the relationship and sex education curriculum covers so many areas, but I think the fact that I've done that trauma-informed training just really helps me as well. Approach this subject sensitively, because you can really offend, you can really upset, so it's getting that balance right, and knowing who you've got in front of you. But as a parent, speaking as a parent, I don't know, it's just really hard to just be open and honest. I think you want to take some tips from Sydney's mum, by the sounds of it. So yeah, but I think engage with your children's schools and insist on seeing the relationship and sex education policy if it's not on the website, and it should be, and engage in the person who's actually teaching, and ask for a meeting about how they're teaching it to your child as well, and involve the QTVI service as much as you can.
Brilliant, thank you. Sydney.
I feel like I've talked far too much already, but I think the key is open communication. Don't be afraid to talk about it, particularly about everything we've talked about, the boundaries, the awareness of consent, the anatomy itself, the what's appropriate and what's not appropriate, and just conversation. Like, I feel like my mum obviously didn't talk about it endlessly, but I feel like there was a time, my brother was 2 years older than me, and there was a time when we were about, I don't know, 10 and 12, that kind of age, where she talked about it a bit more and just put it really openly into the conversation. And I think, and I'd like to make myself available for contact as well, because from my personal experience, and I'm also a life coach and a qualified coach, and I'm happy to talk to people if you're struggling with communication and that side of things.
Thank you.
But yeah, you can make my contact info available as well, Jane.
I will. Brilliant. Marilyn, thank you for joining us. Have you got a pearl of wisdom you'd like to say to finish?
Oh, well, everyone said such amazing things. Communication is really important. And I think the thing I want to highlight most is what we said earlier about visually impaired teenagers will at some point do it. The key is to make them do it safely. The key is to make sure they have the ability and the skills to make themselves safe in whatever way that may be, you know, whether they choose to have sex and, you know, have the tools available so that they know how to use a condom, or whether they go out to a club and, you know, how to avoid being spiked, and all of those things in all of those aspects are really important, because there's no avoiding it. It will happen. It's just really important to make sure that it happens safely.
Thank you very much. Andrea, anything you'd like to add?
I think that relationships are all very natural, and when your kids do get older, it is very normal for them to want to enter in those kind of sexual relationships, but they might not talk to you about it, because at the end of the day, remember, you are their parents. So
trusted adults, other people can also support, I guess. Brilliant. We are coming to the end, but I'd like to also thank Andrea. She is going to go off for a while. She is coming back to look, but she's going on maternity leave, which is utterly amazing. So Andrea, I want to thank you so much. You are going to leave the group in safe hands, because Sydney is coming to run it with me, which is brilliant.
Sorry, folks.
We'll have a bit more capacity as well for, you know, when we have our talking sessions and we have bigger numbers, because, you know, Sid and I can tag team, but you have been utterly brilliant, Andrea. I'm really glad we've got another blind adult supporting, because we need to know as parents, those kind of pearls of wisdom that you've always been great at sharing with us, and you are just such a star. So good luck from all of us. I will keep the group updated, and we will look forward to the baby pictures, and for you coming to New College to talk about parenting.
I mean, isn't it just so perfect that Andrea is going on maternity after this?
Yeah. Thank you all for joining us, and say goodbye to you all.